YouTube found a community, David Lee fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens. We're joined here today by filmmaker, historian, author, overall awesome dude, David Leaf. David, man, thank you so much for being back on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I love how you've got some of my work over your shoulders. It's very cool. Obviously, it's a smile focus, but
Yes.
um, yeah, I see a few things I worked on.
I mean, including, where is it? Including that, which is how we actually connected, was on that little CD review that I did. You sent me a message about that one time, and that's how we started talking, which to this day blows my mind.
It's only 20 plus years ago.
I know. Well, let's start talking about this because I plowed through this thing and I loved every second of it. It was so, how do we even put this into words? It was refreshing. It was the context of going back in time with this thing was so fun. And it brought me back to when the Smile CD came out and I got to go see Brian on tour and do the show. So hearing everybody's memories about it was fascinating, and just the level of love in this book is wild. So what started you going down the rabbit hole of putting this thing together? Because look at this thing is huge. This is a huge book. Like, how did this come to be? How did this start?
Well, it actually started exactly the opposite of what you're holding. The publisher who put out God Only Knows in 2022, when I told them about the 20th anniversary of Brian Wilson Presents Smile, and I wanted to do a book to celebrate it, he said, "Great, what do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, you know what? When I did the documentary Beautiful Dreamer, maybe 2% of the interviews actually make it into the film. So I said, I'd love to publish a book of interviews, of all the interviews I did." And he said, no. He said, interview books don't work well for us. He said, you need to make it an oral history. And I was not happy to hear that
Yeah.
because it was like a teacher saying, well, yeah, you can get an A in the course. Here's what you're going to have to do to get an A. And so I was confronting this gigantic pile of work. And I'm so glad he said that, because if he hadn't done that, this book would not be what it is. And I'm glad that the book works for you, because I'm really proud of it. And as I say in the author's note, the goal was to let everyone else have their voice, have their chance to talk about Smile. And while I obviously have, I chime in more than a few times. I think it's about 75% of the book is other people's voices. And to include, all the people who were there for the original Smile sessions, to include Brian's band, uh, to have an entire chapter of people who were at Royal Festival Hall, a
Yeah.
chapter, a chapter of recollections from people who saw him on the Smile tour. All of that just, I'm not exactly sure how each idea came to me, but as it did, it just seemed natural to invite everybody in, because, as I say in the book, the story of Smile is like looking through a kaleidoscope. You turn it and you see it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So this is my version of the Smile story as told through all of these voices. And so as I say, I'm really happy that you dove in and came out on the other side satisfied.
It was a rewarding rewarding read because it's so honest. And I think what caught me the most was hearing being involved in those times. Like, you get taken back to the 60s and how the record came to be and who was involved and what was going on. But what my biggest takeaway, what was equally fascinating, was for as amazing as the gestation was of that record back in the 60s, going back to it again in 2003 and 2004 was equally as fascinating because they're going back to this work that never got finished. And so you get to finish it now. And I think the coolest thing about that, and I wrote this in one of my notes, was that, like, it's the story about going from Plymouth Rock to Diamond Head. And in those 36 years, it was like if you walked that. Like, you walked from Plymouth Rock and you got to Diamond Head on foot. And that's how long it took to finish this project. So you lived the whole thing. Um, as you were doing these new interviews, and we're getting on in time at this point. The Smile was almost 60 years ago at this point. Talking to people again, what was it like for them to revisit these memories? And did you learn anything new from people that you've talked to previously, or what was the interview process like?
Well, the people from the 60s, David Anderley sadly has passed. Uh,
Right,
Danny Hutton I had interviewed for Beautiful Dreamer. Michael Vossi has passed. Chuck Britz has passed. So there was, I had to use archival interviews. Brian isn't doing interviews these days.
right.
So I used the interview I did with him for Beautiful Dreamer. I asked Van Dyke to do an interview, and he was like, no, he just didn't want to do another interview about Smile.
I get it.
And and so when I read the transcript of the interview from Beautiful Dreamer, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad he didn't do a new interview because his interview was done before the world premiere in London.
Right.
And he's telling the story, and you're I think the thing that was really surprising to me that I think, you know, spoiler alert, we know Brian goes up on the stage and does the concert. But as you're reading what's happening in 2003 into 2004, I feel like there's a great deal of uncertainty, even though you know what's about to happen. And so I for the most part didn't do new interviews with anybody the band from the 2003 2004 section
Yeah.
that I hadn't interviewed back during the Beautiful Dreamer days.
Right.
The new interviews that yielded stunning results, like with Glenn Max, who was the head of Royal Festival Hall,
Yeah.
and Brian's uh, music agent was the one who he and Glenn Max are the ones who put it all together. Because as they explain in the book, this was a very expensive thing to do
Right.
to have the band and the Stockholm Strings and Horns, and no one knew if it was going to go beyond Royal Festival Hall.
Yeah.
So months of work, months of rehearsal, and was it going to be a one and done? And so it wasn't like the book. It was a labor of love. You mentioned the 36 plus years to walk from Plymouth Rock to Diamond Head. One of my favorite quotes in the books comes from LA Times uh, former LA Times music writer Randy Lewis, said that Mozart was born, lived, wrote all of his music, and died in less time than it took for Smile to come into the real world. And when you think of that, it's beyond all imagination. It really
Yeah.
is. The other thing um, that the editor insisted upon, because I didn't want to write about 66, 67 again.
Right.
I really didn't. There were two chapters in California Myth slash God Only Knows. There were liner notes, tour program notes. I didn't think I had anything to say about it.
Right.
He said, no, you can't. You have to explain to the reader why this matters.
I get it.
So, so very reluctantly, I went back to revisit. And boy, am I glad I did, because Van Dyke's interview, I think, is incredible. His first wife, Terry Parks, is stunning. Joan Taylor, Derek Taylor's widow. And, when make a documentary like Beautiful Dreamer or the U.S. versus John Lennon or The Night James Brown Saved Boston, E.G.'s, This Is Where I Came In. When we edit it, we've gathered all this incredible material and we do what's called a paper cut.
Yeah.
And so the paper cut is essentially the sound bites in sequence. For Beautiful Dreamer, if you think of whether it's a narrative feature or a documentary feature in a three-act structure, my first paper cut of Act One of Beautiful Dreamer was about 4 hours long.
Oh my God.
It needed to be 35 minutes long. And, and so essentially what the book is is like reading a 10 or 12-hour documentary
Yeah.
in the people's voices. And Nelson Bragg uh, had a great comment about the book. He said it makes Beautiful Dreamer look like the Cliff Notes version of the Smile story. And I think that's pretty great.
I can agree with that because as I was reading it, I remembered a lot of the quotes from the movie, and I went back and watched the movie as well because it's been a minute since I've seen it. And it's funny because like there's so many things in the book where, especially with Van Dyke, where he goes on about certain things, but it gets cut off so briefly in the
Right.
movie. So if for anyone watching, if you love that documentary, the book is like 10 times in depth from what the movie was, and I love it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's incredible, but compiling the book and putting it in order, how did you decide how to do it with the quotes? Because there's so many quotes that I feel are kind of not generalizations, but like, oh yeah, we were doing this in the 60s. So like, how do you kind of fit what into what part? What was that
I
like?
I have no idea how I did it. I really don't. You know, it was incredibly complex
Yeah,
in terms of sequencing. But I had a net. I'm just sitting at my laptop, so there was nobody saying, "Hey, you missed your mark." I just could fix it
right.
easily with cut and paste. What I knew was I needed to get, as I wrote in the book, we need to get to 1966 really fast
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and understand what was going on that year uh, in terms of Brian's artistic development, which was happening at warp speed.
yeah,
And there were so many different thoughts. I mean, there's a chapter in the book that I didn't know if it was necessary or not, but I found a piece of discarded narration from Beautiful Dreamer that ends Smile in a Nutshell chapter.
mm,
Because I felt that, look, if you love Brian Wilson, if you're a Smile fan, if you're a fan of music history, this book should have some significant appeal for you.
yeah,
But I was thinking, okay, what if you know nothing?
right.
What if you're coming to this cold? And so I tried to, in as short a space as possible, write this story of Smile.
Yeah,
And in those couple of pages, lay out what you were about to read. And as I say, when I found that discarded piece of narration, that miracles take time. So
yeah,
you got to sit back and kind of dive into it. This isn't. I think it's true of God Only Knows, and I think it's true of this book. It's these are these are dense books, not in a bad sense, but there's so much there.
yeah,
And there could be so much there on just one page, with two Van Dyke Parks quotes,
yeah,
and it's so what it did for me was it made me feel like the book was worthy of the title. The Smile isn't something you can get all of on the first listen.
yeah,
And so why would a book about that great work of art be something that would be easily absorbed? It should. It's not that it's work, but there's a lot of work to put it together, and I had a great copy editor who helped me immensely. Um, and she was able to say, this doesn't work here, or that doesn't work there, or what about such and such that you know you use in a tour book essay, or so that things in a sense weren't wasted. That said, I've got in my storage area 6 giant cartons labeled Smile.
oh my God, cool.
That's in my regular storage area. In in deep storage, which is a place called Pacific Title, which is where you store videotape so it doesn't deteriorate. I've got 40 boxes from Beautiful Dreamer.
Holy smokes.
So what? what do I do with all this stuff? And my copy editor was very helpful in going through the interviews with me, uh,
Wow.
the, the transcripts and the tapes. Um, now that all of that said, um, book could have easily have been twice as long.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know that it would have been twice as good if it were twice as long. I think that there's only so deep you can get,
Yeah.
and you know if things go well at some point, maybe for the 25th anniversary of Brian Wilson Presents Smile or Beautiful Dreamer, I'll publish a book of complete interviews. Who knows what tomorrow brings? But
Yeah.
I felt I feel a real obligation with particularly with this subject to get as much out into the world as possible because we know that this is music that's going to be studied long after we're gone.
Completely.
And um, uh, this kind of living history, this oral history, is going to be invaluable. There's nothing like it if one wanted to study Johann Sebastian Bach or Mozart. I don't think there's anything like this. Even Gershwin, who's 20th century,
Yeah.
it's there's nothing to me where not only do you read what the participants have to say about it, but the fans and the critics, and so I think I think it's really it's a tough word for me to label. I think it's unique in terms of the kind of book it is.
It's essential because you're right. We don't have those kind of words from a Mozart or a Beethoven, but we do have Brian Wilson. We have video, we have interviews. He's here. Like he's made all these masterpieces and he's still around. And to be able to contextualize all that and put it into a book that so many people have stories about, it's a wonderful document for Beach Boys fans because you get wrapped in the story, you get absorbed into it. Um, this is kind of a broad question I wanted to ask you because you're objective.
Before you ask that question,
Yeah.
every one of the people who's in the book, you could sit for an hour or longer
Oh
with them
yeah.
and hear their stories.
Yeah.
So how in the world do you figure out which person gets to say what?
Everyone's story was so special and important, and they all added something integral to the story because it was one little nugget of this or detail of
Mhm.
that where I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that before. Like, oh, I didn't know that before. So, for me, I've been a Beach Boys fan for, I don't know, 30 years, whatever. So I'm still finding new things, and this book was highly enjoyable because of that.
Thank you.
Um, absolutely. I know your story is about going out west, meeting Brian, and having him finish Smile. That was your objective and your MO in life. Um, and that you've done so much work with Brian over the years, and particularly with Smile. Broad what if question, which is one of my favorite Beach Boys things, the what if question. If Smile had come out in the 60s and you had read a Rolling Stone article about them in 1971 about the new album that had been out and they'd already done other albums since Smile, would you have been as interested in the Beach Boys or as big as a fan and have jumped into the rabbit hole as deeply as you did? Or do you think the mystery of Smile is what got you highly involved in them? And
Um, it's the former. The short answer is no. I would not. I would have moved to California to become a sitcom writer. I mean,
ooh,
that was where I belonged because
yeah.
I'm a wise guy. I'm a smart aleck. I'm a class clown. Um, you know, two of my greatest possessions in life are are something that anyone in the world could have. Every big city, every tourist city has these shops where you go in and you buy knickknacks or something with the name of the city. So if you want to go into one on Hollywood Boulevard, they sell these statues that look like Oscars with world's greatest dad, world's greatest
Sure.
whatever. And one day Brian gave me two statues, world's greatest comic and world's greatest writer. And those mean more to me than, pretty much anything
That's
because
awesome.
because that it showed his appreciation for what I was writing. Not that he was reading it, but
Yeah.
he knew from everybody who he trusted that I wasn't doing him, I was doing right by him.
Yeah.
But the fact that I made him laugh. So on my Facebook page, picture that I love, it's my favorite picture of he and I, and our backs are to the camera, but he's laughing. And so it's not a posed laugh. It's not, hey Brian, laugh. Hey Brian,
Yeah.
smile. He's just laughing. And I have no idea what I was saying, other than we were walking into NBC studios because he was going to be on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno to promote the Brian Wilson Presents Smile album.
Yeah.
And Mark London just snapped this candid photo, and I loved it. So back to your first question. Um, if Smile had been finished, there would have been no story for me to chase.
Valid.
The when I read Tom Nolan's article in Rolling Stone in the fall of 1971, it did a couple of things. One, it really pissed me off
Mm.
that that this guy who had brought so much joy to the world seemed to be being treated not only badly, but being used to get publicity.
Hmm.
So that was something that affected my righteous indignation at a time when I was 19 years old. I was in college in D.C., living 5 blocks from the White House. Uh, as I said about that era, we got tear gassed whether we wanted to or not.
Right.
I mean, there was so much going on
Yeah.
in the anti-war movement and in the suppression of free speech that Nixon and his attorney general and his soon-to-be jailed vice president Spiro Agnew
Mm.
spoke about. So I was really, I won't go into the long story about being chased from the Lafayette Park and going to demonstration, but so I was angry.
Yeah.
So now I'm reading the story. Now I'm angry that what happened to this guy? What did they do to this guy? And then because of the part one of the article, I go and buy the Surf's Up album. And I'm listening to it. Side one, good. Okay. Side two, Till I Die comes on. And well, this is one of the most beautiful and saddest songs I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And as I'm listening to it, it's like a high class in my room, I think is what I wrote for my college newspaper.
That's a good way to put it.
But it was, and it drove me to my college newspaper. I had only been writing about sports at that point for the newspaper. I said, can I write an album review? So I reviewed Surf's Up and eventually became the music editor of the college paper.
Cool.
So that was one minor impact. So I hear Till I Die, and it's like, wait a second, I've just read about this guy with all his troubles. Clearly, he can still create magic.
Right.
And then I hear Surf's Up, and it's like, oh my God, this is just as great as the article is making out to be.
Yeah.
And so, one, I'm angry that I can't hear it. And two, from a purely selfish point of view, I've got to hear the rest of this music. And my roommate David Polino and I, we became obsessed.
Yeah.
There was a guy on our dorm floor who was the resident assistant, um, Bob. I'm forgetting his last name, who had Beach Boys Today and a couple of other early albums. And you could go into the record store, into the cutout bins, and you could still buy Smiley Smile, Wild Honey, Friends in 2020 for $1.49 or something like that.
So good.
So as I'm hearing Evanescence and Our Prayer, in a sense, I'm getting angrier and angrier. It's like, why would anybody not hear this music and think, oh my God, how lucky am I to be part of this? Now, I didn't know any of the backstory of what was going on. I'm just going just purely on what I'm reading in this article.
Right.
And so my roommate and I are talking about it. I'm talking about how wrong this is, just ready to fight. And he's like, well, if you feel so strongly about it, why don't you do something about it? And and that's when, okay, I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. And that would be like a kid in high school saying, "I'm going to be president of the United States one day." Well,
Right.
somebody is going to be president,
Right.
but I was having breakfast with an old friend of mine who I met in 1976, right after I moved to L.A. He was a clerk at the original Rhino Record store
Oh, cool.
in Los Angeles, and he went on to have a very successful career in the business. But Rhino was one of the few stores that carried That Sounds fanzine when I did it.
I know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that store and Greg Shaw had a store, uh, um, and anyway, so it was a place I hung out at because I only lived maybe a mile and a half away from there.
Yeah.
It's and so when I'm publishing Pet Sounds, when I'm talking, we all have our passions in this store. Somebody's into the Velvet Underground and someone's into Zappa, and everyone's fighting for what they believe in, and
Yeah.
it's like, and I'm like crazy talking about Brian and Smile, and so when I saw Jeff a few weeks ago, we're having breakfast. He said, "You know what you did is like Babe Ruth's called shot." He said it because it was an absolute billion to one or billion to one
I mean,
possibility.
yeah, completely. Like, I'm gonna go beat Brian Wilson and be his friend and get him to finish an album he never wanted to finish. What?
Uh, knowing nothing about whether he even wanted to finish it,
Right. Right.
knowing nothing about the internal politics of the Beach Boys, knowing nothing about anything.
Right. Right.
Um, but it was being his friend that. So after we did the twofers, came time to do the Good Vibrations box set, and
Yeah.
Andy Paley and I did a tentative track listing. To this day, I regret not including Trader, Carl's classic, and
Yeah.
it's truly missing from the box.
Incredible
Eh,
song.
At any rate, I went up to Brian's house to go over the list with him, and there was one song he wanted taken off. And I said, why? And he explained, and it was like, okay, it's Brian Wilson. He produced the work. He doesn't want it on the box. My attitude was, as great as that song is, okay.
Yeah.
And I said, Brian, there's one thing I got to ask you. And I kind of took a deep breath, and I said, box track listing, it goes from Good Vibrations, the single, to Heroes and Villains, the single. So in what is a career retrospective, there's no music from the Smile sessions. And he says, kind of looks at me, what do you mean? I said, well, for it to be a true career retrospective, we should hear some of the music from the Smile sessions so that we understand what you were doing at that time. And without hesitation, he said, okay, which songs? And I rattled off a bunch of songs, which to me were both great songs and close enough to finish that you could one could include them. I purposely did not mention Mrs. O'Leary's cow,
Hmm.
um, rightly or wrongly. I did that was like, okay, let's not push it. He's agreed to put Smile music on the box.
Right. Right.
So this is going to be, after years of bootlegs, this is going to be the first official release in one place of a half hour of Smile music,
Incredible.
and that was a big deal. And then I started talking to him, and I don't know which came first, but I know one time I went over to his place with a bunch of index cards on which I had written the titles for all the known Smile songs.
Okay.
And we stood at his kitchen table for I don't know how long trying to sequence it to,
Oh my
to no
God.
to no avail.
Yeah.
And anyway, but I think out of that conversation, I think the reason for it was I said, Brian, this music is so beautiful, that what I would love to do is find a symphony orchestra and a choir to perform it so the world could hear it. And his reply was classic Brian. Good. I deserve it. So each one of these things is steps along the way
Yeah,
to what was truly a major turning point was the performance of Heroes and Villains at the Radio City tribute that I wrote and produced.
right.
And as the writer and producer of the show, as the person whose idea the show was, and I had unsuccessfully sold it for years until I teamed up with Chip Racklin, and then we brought in Phil Ramone, who was essential,
Yeah,
just absolutely essential. But because it was sort of my show, I said, look, this can't be a night where we hear nothing but Beach Boys' greatest hits. That's not what this is. This is a tribute to Brian Wilson. So the tribute opens with Our Prayer, sung by the Boys Choir of Harlem.
insane.
Um, exactly. Insane is the word. And Surf's Up's got to be on this show. Who's going to do Surf's Up? And I remember we were in a production meeting, and a woman named Allie Gifford was in charge of booking talent. Goes, let me pray on that. That was what she said. Let me pray on that. And the next day she said, I think Vince Gill could do it. I did not know Vince Gill, even though I had at least one Pure Prairie League album. His name meant I didn't know it.
Right.
Um, at any rate, and I was a big country music fan, so I didn't know him as a solo artist. And I remember at rehearsal when he was singing "The Warmth of the Sun," which is as great a cover version of a Brian Wilson song as there has ever been. Probably Mike Love's greatest lyric
Yeah.
in his work with Brian. I was standing with Vince's manager, and I said to him, I said, I can't believe how great he is. And his manager says, as good a as good a singer as he is, he's a better guitar player. And as good a guitar player as he is, he's a better golfer. And I and I said, "You mean he has a scratch handicap?" And he said, "Yeah." I said,
Yeah.
"That's that." So the guy and the nicest guy in the world.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
And so the story. You want me to tell the story of how Heroes and Villains ends up on the show?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So um, in the Christmas season of 2000, Scott Bennett had a Christmas party at his house that my late wife Eva and I were at, and Linda and Brian and the band. And Eva and Brian were sitting on a piano bench with their backs to the piano. And Brian says to Eva, "What would you like for Christmas?" And she says, "For you to play Heroes and Villains." And he turns around and says, "Okay." And he starts playing it. And from all over the house, if you weren't in that room, you came running in because, first of all, somebody's playing Heroes and Villains. And if you were in Brian's band, you knew his piano style.
You're right.
So you came running in. And when he finishes it, I said, Brian, you really should do that at the tribute. And he goes, okay. I mean, it was like, and as Darian says in Beautiful Dreamer, just a month ago, you couldn't even mention Heroes and Villains to him.
Right.
But there was a critical mass of love that was building in Brian's life and solo career. It built tremendously during that first solo tour, exponentially during the Pet Sounds tour in 2000. Band proved there wasn't anything they couldn't do.
Exactly.
And so when they did Heroes and Villains, the shock on people's faces, like Paul Schaefer from the David Letterman band, who knew what this song meant. They understood its mythology,
Yeah.
and they knew Brian. Brian is singing Heroes and Villains, and as Jeff Foskett says, because it wasn't sung in his falsetto, when he starts the song in the, you think you're hearing the record.
Yeah.
That's how good it is.
Yeah.
And so he does it and gets this rousing standing ovation. And he during the whole show, he's in the wings listening to everybody talk about how great he is. He sees the performance of Our Prayer. He sees the performance of Surf's Up. And so suddenly the notion that, as the word he used, the musical smile wasn't appropriate.
Yeah. Right.
That was the word he had used up until that moment.
Right.
Well, suddenly it was appropriate. It wasn't that he wasn't scared of it anymore, but it was okay. And they added songs from that show to the tour. So
Right.
suddenly he was doing those songs, not every night. And um, the following year went to England to do Pet Sounds start to finish.
Right.
And then the question, it was the people in England get Brian Wilson
Yes.
in a way that really outside New York City and the Northeast, people in America don't.
Agreed.
It's just Pet Sounds was second coming for them when
Right.
it came out in 1966. It tied. NME couldn't decide who to give album of the year to, so they gave it to Revolver and Pet Sounds. That's how big a deal it was
I
to
didn't want.
everybody except Capitol Records
Right.
and
Right.
certain members of the group. Anyway, the conversation begins. Well, how do you follow a Pet Sounds tour? What can you do that will top that? And there is nothing that will top that. And Melinda, as Brian described in 1995, had given him the emotional security to do Orange Great Art with Van Dyke Park,
Yes.
to do the Don Was film, to actually have a solo career, to go on tour. Um, again, I don't even know what the phrase exactly means, but there was this critical mass of love for Brian that he saw when he went on those first dates because he had been told, "You're a Beach Boy, you're a Beach Boy, you're a Beach Boy." Now he's getting the audience's love.
Right.
That's Brian Wilson. His
Right.
band is performing the songs as he arranged and produced them 30 years earlier.
Yeah.
So there's no question there isn't anything he can't do.
Yeah.
And so he agreed to do this thing that, for legal and other reasons, became was called Brian Wilson Presents Smile. And we went to England in the spring of 2003 for him to get the Ivor Novello Award, which is a big award.
Yeah.
And then at a press conference after that, he just very kind of casually mentioned to the reporters, "Yeah, we're going to come back next year and do Smile." And it was like, well, it was like a musical nuclear bomb went off at this notion. Now he's excited, he's happy, and then he gets back to we get back to the United States. He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to think about it.
Right.
It's just this. It's like, how am I going to do this? And the two key elements were both Darian Sahanaja and the existence of computers,
Right.
so that he and Darian could just move music around and they found a sequence they were satisfied with. And then Van Dyke Parks came in because I had I had gotten from Frank Holmes at some point. Frank had given me a folder with lyrics to songs that he had gotten from Van Dyke to do the illustrations for the original Smile booklet. And I
Right.
say, I don't remember the occasion as to why he gave them to me, but when Darian and Brian started working together, I gave Darian the lyric sheet for "Do You Like Worms?" I said this might come in handy. So, so
Just casually, no big.
just
Yeah.
so one day they're listening to the instrumental, and Brian's humming along, and Darian tells the story great in the book, and Darian says, "Were there words to this?" Knowing full well that there were.
Right.
And Brian, who uh, historically, since he shelved Smile, has taken the path of least resistance.
Mhm.
Um, in almost all the time. Um, so yeah, there were words, and Darian whips them out. Brian grabs them from him and starts to sing along to the track, and gets to a line, and he can't read a word. God damn it! What is this? So he picks up the phone and calls somebody who's been waiting for a phone call from him for months and months and months, and it's Van Dyke Parks. And they fax the lyrics over. You know, he can read, he can decipher it, and the next day Van Dyke joins Brian and Darian's effort to finish instrumentals that need lyrics, a couple of new pieces, and and put it together to everybody's satisfaction, except a few naysayers. There's always going to be somebody. It's not what it would have been. It's not what it would have been. It's not what it could have been. And yeah, of course it isn't. But Brian's great statement was, "This is how I feel about this music now."
And that's more important.
And
Yeah,
that's really all that mattered, is he was happy with it.
completely.
So in the book, Darian and Van Dyke, and to a lesser degree Brian, are telling this story of this reconstruction
Yeah.
that is, I think it's as deep uh, a version of the reconstruction of as we've seen, in terms of Darian and Van Dyke explaining, first Van Dyke explaining the original songs
Hmm.
and what they meant in their intent, and then the explanation of what they're doing in 2003, and then how it's going to come together with the band. And one of the strongest voices in that section of it was my surprise when I went back and read his interview, was Nelson Bragg,
Mm.
for whom Brian Wilson Presents Smile was his very first tour
Ooh,
with
that's cool. I
with
forgot
the
about
group.
that. Yeah.
So he gets a call from Darian saying, "Hey, would you like to join the band?" And he had said, when he watched the Radio City tribute, he said, "Those are my people. I should be in that band. I want to be in that band. How can I be in that band?"
Right.
And so he goes over to Darian's and gets the sequencing, Darian's vocals of what is Brian Wilson Presents Smile. And that's his introduction to Brian's world.
No pressure. Yeah.
No pressure at all. He talks significantly about the pressure. There are great archival quotes from Jeffrey Foskett, who I was trying to do a new interview with, and we were emailing back and forth, and we were scheduled to do it one day, and I got an email that morning. He says, "I'm sorry, David, I have no voice."
Mm.
And we tried to schedule it again, and he just was getting his health was getting worse, and then he passed away.
Yeah.
Without if I had been thinking, I would have just emailed him a couple of questions, but he was optimistic that he was going to be well enough to do it.
We all thought that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Howard Volman a little while ago. Uh, Howard Volman stories, if you go back to again, to the original myth making stories by Jules Siegel and Tom Nolan and Paul Williams,
Mm.
you know, he's there, but for some reason I never talked to him. It hadn't occurred to me to talk to him. I mean, a lot of it had to do when I wrote the Beach Boys and the California Myth. I think I did it in about 4.5 months,
Whoa.
start to finish,
Jeez.
uh, which included doing the interviews.
Yeah. That's
Uh,
fast.
it was really fast.
I
I,
suppose.
I approached it as a journalist, same way
Yeah.
I approached this. Um, and in this book, it was more about how do I contextualize where we are in the story and what you're about to hear, and then get out of the way. But there are certain things that where I have to kind of chime in a lot more, particularly about the end of Smile in '67,
Right.
when everybody's got these theories about why he stopped working on it. And
Yeah.
Brian's pretty clear about why he stopped working on it. What drove him to that? And I don't know, there's 9 or 10 or 11 reasons I list.
A lot. Yeah. Um, as far as the ending and coming back to it in 2003, the book and the documentary, they focus a lot on Brian's feelings and how he was really scared about it, but then got into it again and had fluctuating feelings during the whole process. With Van Dyke Parks, he talks about it too, but like, he was a part of that group that kind of left the circle when it stopped being fun after all the pressures kind of came in and it just outside forces kind of shut it down internally back in the 60s. When Van Dyke came back into the picture, was he equally as shaky about being involved in the project again, or was he more of like, "Oh, Brian's doing this. I should just get over my anxieties or that I might have and go head first into it." What was that like for Van Dyke?
Well, there were two things that address your question. One was when Brian announced that he was going to do Brian Wilson Presents Smile. Van Dyke heard about it the way almost everyone else did, through the media.
Oh wow, jeez.
Brian hadn't called him in advance and said, "Hey, Van Dyke, what do you think?" Um, so Van Dyke assumed that he would soon get a phone call from Brian saying, "Hey, let's get to work."
Right, right.
That phone call did not come because in one reason it didn't come was Brian wasn't addressing it at all.
Yeah,
The announcements made in February, June, July, August, nothing happened.
yeah,
It just became, how do I do this? Why am I doing this? Should I do this? I mean,
yeah.
all this stuff started piling up in his psyche. Van Dyke, when he finally got the call, he describes it quite. Uh, what I love about Van Dyke's quotes is you can't read them just once.
You need a thesaurus or two. Yeah,
Yes, but he's pretty clear. He was wary. Um, he says something like, I was wary that the another involvement in this would be, doesn't use the word catastrophic, but
mm,
would be uh, uh, as kind of as bad as the first time.
right,
So he was really concerned.
right.
Um, the thing that I think all of us missed was Brian's determination to finally do this.
Yeah.
And um, the time during the vocal rehearsals, well, before the vocal rehearsals started, we were months before the vocal rehearsals started. We were coming back from the movies in Santa Monica, walking up the Third Street Promenade, and he said to me, he says, I can't do this unless you're there with me every day. Like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? What do you mean there with you every day?
Yeah.
And I really shouldn't have been that dumb about it because in 1999, just before the first tour, when he was rehearsing with the band in Chicago, he called and said, "I need you guys to come out and be here with us. I need you here for emotional security."
Yeah.
I said, "Brian, I've got a company. I, I can't be there." I said, "The only way I could be there was if I was making a documentary about it." And then
Yeah.
it's classic Brian. Okay. It's like, yeah. And that night we talked to Melinda about it. And she said, "Well, what will Beach Boys fans think of the documentary?" And in more colorful language that I'll use here, I said, "It really doesn't matter what Beach Boys fans think of the documentary. We're all going to love watching Brian put Smile back together again."
100%.
What I'm trying to do with this film is reach the 99% of the world who's never heard of Smile and doesn't know who Brian Wilson is. That was the goal.
Exactly.
So she got that. Um, when rehearsal started, Brian was in a terrible, terrible place,
Yeah.
and you can see it in Beautiful Dreamer. And he gets
Completely.
up, and he gets up the second day, and he says, "I'll be right back." And a few minutes later, the band decides to take a break, and then the band comes back. I'm sitting there with the camera crew, and the band comes back, and Where's Brian? So I go downstairs from the music room to where Melinda's office is. And I said, is Brian here with you? Or is Brian here with you? And she goes, no, I thought he was up there with you.
God.
And she looks out into the driveway and sees his car is gone. And for no exaggeration, the next 3 hours, we have no idea where Brian is.
Terrifying.
It was pretty concerning,
Yeah.
to say the least. Terrifying would be a good description. Anyway, the emergency room from the hospital calls, St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, and says Brian would like you to come over. Says it asks for me. Calls. Linda answers the phone. Says, "Where's this guy? Talk to David Lee." She hands me the phone, identifies who she is, and says, "Brian would like you to come over." I said, "Where are you?" He says, she tells me, and so Melinda and I left from the house, and Eva left from her office and met us at the emergency room. And we go into if you've ever been in an ER, they're not fun places, that's for sure.
Horrible.
Brian had already been examined and was in a room. And we go into this room where he is, and he starts talking about killing himself. And Eva, who was very smart about a lot of, or was very smart about a lot of stuff, said, Brian, shut the F up. If they hear you use that word, they will put you on automatic 72-hour watch, and
Right.
you will be here for 3 days, no matter what else you say.
Yeah.
So he gets it, and it's like, Brian, let's just get out of here and go to dinner.
Yeah.
And so he's that's a better idea certainly, which we do. When we leave the emergency room, he and I are walking on the sidewalk about 20 feet ahead of where Melinda and Eva are walking. And that's just the second day of shooting. I've already signed a contract with Showtime. This is going to be the biggest film of my career to this
Yeah.
point.
Right.
And now I have to be Brian's friend. And I said, Brian, if this is going to make you sick again, we have to stop now.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I have to do it. I have to do it.
Good Lord.
So there was a determination that it was kind of almost like now or never.
Yeah.
And so um, while there was a roller coaster for the next month or so, as I say, we should never have doubted that he was going to walk up the steps at the Royal Festival Hall. He knew how great the music was. He knew he had a band who could play it.
Right.
He
Right.
knew he could sing it. He knew the audience was going to be there. He's so sweet in so many ways. I mean, Paul Mertens has a great remembrance of opening night when the two of them are standing backstage and looking out at the crowd. And Brian says,
Yeah.
"Oh, a lot of people here." And Paul says, "Yeah," he says, "sold out. In fact, all 6 nights are sold out." Brian in his kind of naive face, what do they pay, like $50 a ticket? And Paul says, no, I think is people pay a lot more than that. And Brian says, well, we better give him an effing good show.
Right.
Nothing more. It's just there's a simple beauty to the way he confronts every situation. And I had said to my main cinematographer, James Mathers, for all of you old time TV folks, James Mathers' brother, Jerry Mathers, played the role of Leave It to Beaver on the lead character on Leave It to Beaver.
Hey, there you go. Cool.
Um, James Mathers was shooting the film. He had shot all the vocal rehearsals. He had shot all the band rehearsals. He was in London with us now. And I said to him, when Brian walks up the steps, I want you right behind him because I feel it's going to be like Dead Man Walking.
Yeah.
It wasn't. He walked up the stairs very confident.
Yeah. Yeah, fluid.
and and bowed to the audience, bowed right, bowed left, sat down at his keyboard, right into it, and
There it
you
goes.
know, and it it was great from start to finish. If you know anybody who would like to be a producer, we have an entire documentary to be made about that night with the full concert. Have them call me. Anybody win the lottery lately?
Yeah, right.
Uh, but you know, so every step of the way, it could be two steps forward, one step back.
Yeah,
But but there were so many positive steps. Like I remember the day I walked into rehearsal, Tony Escher had given me, probably when we did that Sound Sessions box set, he had given me the lyrics he had written for Good Vibrations.
so cool.
So I went over to Brian. I said, "Hey, Brian, I got this from Tony. These are the lyrics he wrote for Good." I didn't even get vibrations out of my mouth when he snatched it out of my hand, looked at it, and said, "Okay, these are the lyrics we're going to do."
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So the book is, I think, full of holy smokes moments like that.
It was. It was a roller coaster. Um, you having studied Smile a good chunk of my life, this was a fascinating deep dive into something I thought I knew a lot about. But the most exciting part for me was reading about the 2003 and 2004 era because how often does somebody return to a work decades after they started it? It's extremely rare. And a lot of the times when it's done, the results aren't good because you're out of that space. You're not that 24-year-old kid anymore. You're a grown up now. And so like for him to go back and finish it, that was one thing I wanted to ask you too, is like as you guys as like Darian and Brian were putting it together and sequencing things, I know that it was presented to Brian as like, we're just gonna figure out how to perform this music. What was that catalyst to where it was like, oh, we should finish this now? Was it just discovering the parts that were around and like how to wrap it up?
Well, it was Darian said we're just trying to figure out how to perform it live,
Right,
not how to finish an album.
right.
Once the first tour was over, probably long before the first tour was over, it was clear we've got to go and make a record of this. And
Yeah.
then the question became how to make a record. David Byler had done such records, flew from New York to London to see it because, like so many of us, he had done his own DIY cassettes of
Yep.
Smile. He was that big a fan.
That's a bootleg.
Shh.
Well, kind of, yeah.
Um, so the fact that he was already so invested in the music,
Yeah,
you're right. Usually when people revisit something, um, they can't recapture the spirit that they had when they first did it. It's almost impossible.
yeah.
However, and I'm not a music historian. I play one at UCLA. The, the, the music was so timeless when it was created. It was so far ahead of its time. And even in 2004, while it wasn't ahead of its time in 2004, it was still timeless.
It's still that way now. It doesn't feel like it belongs to any generation. It's just music that's meant to be enjoyed. Um, I vividly remember going to the store and buying this exact copy, the CD, and being so blown away that I can go to a store and pick up Smile and own it and actually look at the track listing and it was done. And I remember putting it on and my initial instinct was how special this is that like I know that the Beach Boys version exists and that's wonderful. That's so cool for its time. It's awesome. This was equally as impressive because it's Brian, then now with his more mature voice and the band behind him believing in the spirit and the music so much. And Darian in the book says at one point, we learned it, but then we felt it. Like we felt the music, and that was so much more important. And you feel that on this performance. You feel how tight they are. They just want to get that message across so well and tell that story. I remember being so blown away by it because, growing up, Smile was something you read about in a book. And I was a kid in the 90s, so I never knew about bootlegs and all that kind of, the internet didn't exist yet, so I never heard much of anything besides stuff on the CDs, like Wonderful by Smiley Smile and the 2020 stuff. Um, so playing this thing all the way through for the first time was an event. I remember being in my room, my parents' house, in however old I was when it came out, and just being so stoked about it, and then watching your documentary about it. So for me and a lot of fans growing up, this thing is incredibly special and holds such a place in that Brian Wilson story that 20 years later, it still feels as fresh as it did back then. Like revisiting it now and diving into this book, it's funny because like I get a little nostalgic about it, but all these remembrances feel new. So it's like another version of the story, another chapter of that story continuing. So it's like Smile will never go away, never be not interesting. Um, what does it mean to you that it's been 20 years? Like, how has it been 20 years? But like, what does it mean to you looking back at it now? And with hindsight, so much more has come out since then. Brian's done other albums. At the time it was like, holy crap, Smile. But now there's history there. So what's that like for you looking back on it, having been a part of that process?
It's all kind of unbelievable. One of the classes I teach at UCLA is called Docs That Rock, Docs That Matter. And the students, it's a way of teaching music, rock music history through documentary.
Right.
So students will see Little Richard and James Brown and Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan and the Beatles, of course, etc. And every year for the last class, without comment, because before most of the films they see will talk about them and what they mean, and there'll be some context. But I show them Beautiful Dreamer, and then I tell them how it came to be.
Yeah.
And I say, when I was your age, when I was sitting in a college classroom, I said to myself, I'm going to move to California, write a book about Brian Wilson, become his friend, and help him finish Smile.
Yeah.
And then I sort of joke, had I known it was going to take 33 years, I'm not, I'm not so sure if that was would have happened.
Yeah.
But it's really the reason I emailed you and said I want your podcast to be the first place I talk about the book is because you're bringing your passion to a whole new generation who will never see Brian Wilson perform
Yeah.
live, who never saw Carl and Dennis on the same stage, who never saw the Beach Boys. And you can see him in some good clips. And there hasn't been a great Beach Boys documentary, unfortunately. Alan Boyd is good, but it's hard to tell a story of a group who can't agree on what the story is.
And there's so many people telling that non-story.
And so um, people often ask me this or that about. I said, just listen to the music. That's
Yeah,
all that matters.
exactly.
So music of Smile, when I played it for my fiance, she said, "Wow, this is great." She knew nothing about the backstory. She knew nothing about Brian Wilson. Her favorite music is Brazilian jazz.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was okay. I'm not crazy. Um, it's the journey is so inexplicable that I sit here, as now this gray-haired elder statesman, and and I I said my copy editor asked me a question, and I said I don't know if this is right or wrong. I said this is just the way I see the story,
Yeah,
and so now the fact that there's a chapter called Reintroducing Brian Wilson.
yeah,
The words re in parentheses because for some people it may be just introducing Brian Wilson. But I felt it was important for the reader to get a sense of how important he is to generations of people in popular music,
yeah.
as well as Gustavo Dudamel and you know you know and Leonard Bernstein. this guy's a big deal in music history.
Right.
And the sadness of what happened, the way the Beach Boys and the California Myth ended, the cliched ending of the 1985 update. Where as my grandmother would say, "Where there's life, there's hope." Um, there wasn't a lot of hope. There really wasn't.
Yeah.
And I always talk about, students will ask me, or somebody like me, how did that happen? And I'll say, you remember when you were a kid and you played with dominoes and you would line up 100 or 200 dominoes and you would knock one over and they would all go. I said, if you reached into the middle and took out a couple of dominoes, it wouldn't get to the end.
Yep.
And so that's the story of where we are with Smile, that dominoes got knocked over. Are there missing pieces? Sure. Those missing pieces are not central to what we have.
Yeah, I agree.
And it is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. But Brian is, you know, I saw him today, Tuesday. I saw him 10 days ago,
Oh, nice.
and we're just sitting and listening to music.
Oh, cool.
So that's what he loves to do, listen to
Yeah.
music, and play this, play that. He's the captain of Spotify. But you think about him growing up the way he did in a house and there's nobody who can tell us what it was really like to be inside that house.
I know.
We really don't know.
Right.
I think Brian sums it up quickly when he said, "I was a hero, my dad was a villain."
Yeah.
That's kind of like all you really need to know
It sums it up.
from the outside.
Yeah.
How much physical, emotional, psychological damage was done to the three Wilson brothers, to the Beach Boys as a group? We just don't know. It's immeasurable. A lot of damage was done.
Yeah.
Now, if that damage hadn't been done, Brian have written the music he wrote.
I know.
And, and my sad answer is no, because I think he wrote good vibrations, give himself good vibrations. I think he wrote Love and Mercy is what I need tonight.
In my room. Yeah.
And so I keep writing these books, but his music is his autobiography.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I have to know, what's Brian listening to these days when he calls up something on Spotify? What's he playing?
Well, the funniest one of all, because I was over there with Daria, the oldest of the five. She's
Yeah.
my goddaughter, and he said, "Well, play the fairy tale." And I had the same reaction you had, and I said, "The theme or the whole thing?" He said, "The whole thing."
Cool.
Daria had never heard it,
Oh, wow. Awesome.
and so to her it was like completely brand new, and and I'm 100% certain I'd never listened to it with Brian because there would never have been any call to listen to it
How would
with
that come
Brian.
up? Yeah.
It wouldn't come up. And it's not something you listen to regularly
That's
anyway.
that too.
Um, in retrospect, and I don't mean from 10 days ago retrospect, but from 1976, 77, 78, it's like, here's the guy who made that music for the Magic Transistor radio, because those are the last, I don't want to call them smile songs, but those are the last magical productions and arrangements and vocals that we ever got.
The humor. Yeah.
And and so there's a certain bittersweet nature to it. I mean, all the commotion about not putting it on the album and stuff that's just Beach Boys history.
That's how it goes. Yep. We know that story. I
How,
mean,
how,
okay.
how many times have you read the book?
I've read it through all the way, well, all the way through once, but I've jumped back and read various parts in other passings.
Now,
Um,
one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that there's an anthology in the back of the book.
yes. Those parts in the back were fascinating. Those little essays in the back. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So how did that come to be? Because they were fascinating to dive into because such different worlds and personalities and how the music impacted, especially with the one with Charlotte. But what was it like to get those? How did that happen?
Um, it's kind of, I don't want to say like, if you believe it will come,
Yeah,
or any, what was the line in Field of Dreams?
build it. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, but I wrote a sentence in the author's note at the beginning of the book about how I want this book to be other people's voices.
yeah,
And there were people who I was thinking maybe they would write an essay that would give us some perspective on Smile from their point of view.
yeah.
And to get Tom Nolan to write a piece, the guy who sent me on the journey,
That's
is
re-
is amazingly full circle. And
yeah.
and as far as I know, that he reveals stuff in that piece that we've never ever heard before.
It was a special read.
Um, the Some of the other essays were easy people for me to ask. Like I had to include Dominic Priori in a
Yeah,
special way. But he is the smileologist, as Mojo magazine calls
yeah,
him. Um, uh, there were a couple of others that I probably could have included, but the book was already longer than what the publisher wanted. But you mentioned Charlotte's essay, and one of the things that was just amazing to me about it was, and I don't know how people are going to respond to it. I hope they love it as you did and as I do. But the two songs that kind of are central to her story, central to mine,
yep,
and it was like, how can that be? Well, that is the magic of music. And there were Harvey Kubernick was not just the first person to ever review the Beach Boys and the California Myth back in '78, but has been on the music scene forever. You know, so for him to write about, spoiler alert, you know, leaving his mother's office when he's in school to wander around Hollywood, and there's a theater that he hears the Beach Boys rehearsing Good Vibrations in for their first ever live performance. Um, now Harvey, is in many ways he kind of knows everybody, and he's central to the story because in 1978, uh, after the myth had gone to print, but I think before it had come out, Peter Ream had come out to Los Angeles to visit. For your younger viewers, Peter Ream was the foremost collector of Beach Boys stuff in the 1970s and 80s, outside of Bruce Johnston and Al Jardine and the Beach Boys world. He
right.
had this amazing, amazing collection.
Yeah,
And in exchange for him helping me populate Beach Boys and the California Myth with ephemera from his collection, I said, when the book is done, whatever I've gathered visually, you can have. So
yeah.
he had come out to LA. Well, at the time he was living in Colorado, and I picked him up at the airport, went to my apartment. Um, they came out with an empty suitcase, which was going to be filled with stuff
Right.
to go back with the next morning. So we went out to dinner, had pizza at a place that we all lament is gone, La Barbara's. on Wilshire Boulevard. And we went back to my apartment. There were a couple of leftover slices that I folded up in what we used to call tin foil, aluminum
Yeah.
foil, and put them in the refrigerator. And Peter and I were sitting around talking. You know, as you know, when you're talking with a fellow fanatic, conversation can go on for hours,
Time flies.
and detours lore. And we're going this way and that way. And he says, this is the first time I will have ever come to Los Angeles and not seen Harvey Kubernick and Rodney Bingenheimer.
Cool.
And again, for your younger listeners, Rodney on the Rock was the hippest radio show in Los Angeles, and it figures into the essay Harvey wrote. Anyway, this is, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning. We're talking. 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a knock at the door. It's like, who is knocking on my door at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, right.
And it's Harvey Kubernick, Rodney Bingenheimer, and with them is Brian Wilson.
Oh my.
And Harvey says, we didn't know what to do with him, but we brought him here. So we brought him here. We figured you would know what to do. And they left. And Peter Reman, they're looking at each other. I mean, talk about a collectible.
Yeah.
There's Brian Wilson. And what's the first thing he says? Got anything to eat? And in my bachelor days, the pantry was pretty bare, but there were these two leftover slices of pizza, which I heated up. He wolfed down, then proceeded to lie down on the couch and go to sleep. And a couple hours later, he woke up and asked me to give him a ride home.
Yeah.
But people like Harvey Kubernick, there's wonderful stories that Linda Ronstadt tells. And Debbie Kyle Levitt. These people are among many guardian angels who, as Danny Hudson probably being preeminent,
Yeah.
as Brian kind of wandered the streets of Los Angeles, um, for whatever reason, made sure he was safe.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody has got a great story. I think it was, I don't remember who it was, but Brian sitting outside. Wallach's Music City used to be the big record store in Los Angeles. It
Okay.
was it was owned and operated by the brother of the president of Capitol Records.
Oh, no way. That's cool. Jeez.
And one night, a friend of mine sees Brian sitting at the bus stop outside of Wallach's Music City, holding a little bag of 45 records that he had bought. And it was so late, it's like he stopped and says, "Hey, Brian, the bus isn't running anymore. Do you need a ride?" I mean, it's those kinds of, there's like 8 million of those stories.
I-
So our guy is not only this remarkable artist, this remarkably sweet person,
that
which I think comes through in some of the new interviews I did with people who knew him back in the day.
I completely agree with that. And that's something I've always picked up on when I've read interviews about Brian and the people he met, sometimes kind of randomly that became friends for years in his story. Your friendship with him, you've known him for 50 years at this point, almost 50 years. A good chunk of his life. You've been friends with him. How has your friendship changed over the year? Has it over the years? I know you guys were really close, but like in the early days, was it like just kind of feeling each other out, or when did you get to the point where you were like, wow, we're actually buddies? Like when did that kind of happen?
That didn't happen till the 90s when he was freed from prison.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Um, Times that I saw him in the 70s and early 80s, um, were they weren't random, but they were, oh shit, this is not good.
Yeah.
Um, it was being a friend to somebody who was extremely depressed.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the key phrase that he responded to, not that it was said out loud, but he felt it was would be the phrase unconditional love. I
Yeah.
didn't want anything from him. Many, many times he asked me to write lyrics for songs.
Really? Holy
Yeah,
smokes.
because he could fashion a song at the piano, and he didn't like to write alone.
Yeah.
So, help me out here, kind of.
Um, that would have been like a, I bought your record. Now you want me to write a song with you? It would have been like, what?
Well, but my late wife was very savvy. My late wife was very savvy. She said, if you write lyrics with Brian, you stop being his friend, and you become his lyrical partner for as long as that lasts.
That's,
Look at the history of his people who have written lyrics with him.
yeah, that's true.
They stop being friends. So do you want to be his friend, or do you want to be in business with him?
Yeah.
And so uh, I when I met Brian, and I met him several times. I think I talked to him 3 or 4 times before I met Eva. Under the strangest circumstances. I shouldn't say that. The first time I met him was the most unlikely circumstance. Have I told you that story?
Yeah, with basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on the basketball court with a friend of mine from college, and he and Stan Love walk onto the court and say, "You want to play 2-on-2?" And the whole time we're playing, I'm thinking, is Ray Lawler going to believe this when I tell him? Because it just seemed so, it was so surreal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the next couple of times I saw him was at Beach Boys events of one kind of another,
Yeah.
a party after the concert, an album listening party, a rehearsal for a Beach Boys tour, and he just seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. He didn't want to be where he was,
Yeah.
and it was just very sad to me.
That is
And
sad.
it was, is there anything I can do to help? That
Yeah.
that that would really be the question. The first time I met him as somebody who was in an intimate circumstance with him was when Eva and Debbie Brian was at their place for dinner, and they invited me over because they felt, hey, you're writing a book about him. Maybe you should get to know him a little bit, not interview him, just spend some time with him,
Hang out with him. Yeah.
just hang out. And he was very depressed. He
Yeah.
really was, and with good reason. Um, his greatest years behind him, and there was no reason to think there was going to be this remarkable renaissance that began with his first solo album that
Yeah.
that has earned him a place as a solo artist in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as well as a producing slot of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So he
Right.
should really get in there 3 times.
Yeah.
That's going to take a lot of heavy lifting by somebody, not me. But but
I'll start making calls. Yeah.
yeah, get to work. Seriously, a petition catches people's eyes.
I've done it a couple times now. Yeah.
The but when I saw him in the 1980s, as he was getting sicker and sicker,
Yeah.
and then when he was imprisoned, there were all sorts of different circumstances. But it wasn't until after that I finally saw him, and he knew that I was a friend because of everything that had happened before that.
Yeah. You stuck with him. Yeah. It makes a big difference when, I mean, in that industry, I mean, you know more about this than I do, but it's like there's a lot of hangers on. And there's a lot of people that want something from somebody, or they want money, they want this, they want to get famous, you know. It's probably really hard to make a genuine friend when you're that known.
It's once you've hit that level of fame and success, it's almost impossible to make a new friend.
That's so
It,
hard.
but but one of the things, again, I said Eva was very smart. When we started dating as couples, Brian and Melinda and Eva and I would say almost every time, maybe with one or two exceptions, and we were seeing them for dinner, I don't know, three, four times a week.
Oh wow.
Um, Eva insisted that we pick up the check
Yeah, I get it.
because Brian was golden goose. Everybody expected him to always pay for whatever,
Right.
and he was so almost giddy when the check would come and I would grab it. You know, it's sad.
Yeah.
It really is. Um, but it's one of the natures of success that once you become successful, it doesn't matter what field you're in,
Yeah.
why are people trying to be your friends? And so you know it's the 90s and the first part of the 2000s when we were at our closest, when we saw each other the most. Um, and through about the end of 2005 or so, I would say 2006. I mean, he used to come over to where we lived, and we had a courtyard in our apartment building, and we might have karaoke.
Yeah.
And he'd get up on stage and with me and my older brother, and he'd sing Dion, and we were the Belmonts. I mean, he loved to do what we call
I-
casual sing. He just loved being a regular guy.
Yeah.
Jeff Foskett says it really well in the book. He wanted to be Brian Wilson
You're right. Right.
and not a great Brian Wilson.
Genius. Yeah. Right.
Well, and he was very clear when people called him a genius in the 60s. He would say, "No, I'm ingenious,"
Yeah. Yeah.
is a significant distinction. But
Yeah.
he certainly had a genius ability to put melody and harmony and instruments together, regardless of what you call it. And the
Yeah.
fact, you know, when people say, "Well, don't you think, you know, you're a little too pro Brian?" I would say, you know, I'm going to be on the side with Sir Paul McCartney and Sir Elton John and Sir Barry Gibb and Sir George Martin. I'm going to go with those guys. I think they know what they're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Um, I'm sure Brian knows that the book is coming out. You probably talked about it with him a little bit. Uh,
When I went to see him, I gave him a copy.
oh, awesome. Okay. Um, does he talk about Smile at all these days, or does it come up if you ask him about it, or what's his relationship with the album now?
If I asked him about it, but the question would be, why would one ask him about
Kind of. I mean, it's kind of done. So I mean, like, what would his reaction be to it now? You know?
it? I don't know. I mean, I'll save the answer for the next book. But when we were listening to the fairy tale and that Pied Piper voice came on, I said, "Was that you?" And his answer surprised me. Um, Now the problem with his answer 10 days ago is he's given different answers in the past. So 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 that's why the only truth is in the music.
Yeah, right, right. That's fun.
But I don't know, to ask him about Smile. It's almost like poking at a wound. I mean, it's yes, the scar tissue has been healed over, but
Yeah.
there's still scar tissue.
Still,
So I mean, when we did the interview for Beautiful Dreamer, um, I knew that for the movie to work, he would have to tell me why he stopped working on Smile.
absolutely.
I needed to know from his mouth,
Yeah.
not from old interviews, not from anybody else. Brian, why did you stop?
Yeah, right.
And I kept asking him in different ways, and he's died. You know, one time he said, "David, ask better questions," which is, you know, that's such a great thing. Ask better questions. And and then finally says, "Okay, you want to know? I'll tell you." I think he said, "I'll tell you from my heart. Here are the four reasons why I stopped."
Yeah.
And when he tells you that, and then you try to understand what those four, so okay, those are the four reasons. What's behind those four reasons? Well, he's not, you know, one for lengthy explanation. It's all up here.
Very brief.
If you ask Pete Townsend a question about anything,
10 hours of an answer.
one song on Won't Get Fooled Again, you'll get a half hour.
Right.
You ask Brian a yes or no question, the answer is yes.
Yeah, right.
Um, so I had to really push him. And got some pretty significant responses about how
Yeah.
beaten up he felt. And in a sense, the conclusion I came to based on what he said and what happened was he felt he needed to stop working on it to save the Beach Boys.
I get it.
And that's so that, in a sense, makes him a martyr to Smile. And so Brian Wilson presents Smile is the resurrection,
Hence the book.
and the book. There would never have been a book if not for Brian Wilson presents Smile.
Exactly.
It wouldn't have happened. I didn't want to write another word about Smile. But, when the editor said, no, you've got to tell the story of 66 and 67 again, it's like, oh God, again? And I purposely did not look at what I had written in God Only Knows. I said, okay, I'm going to try not to repeat anything I say. I'm going to write it as if I've never written about it before.
That's a smart way of doing it, because that way you're not conscious of what you've already done. You're aware of something new.
Well, it was new to me anyway.
Right. Um, I absolutely adore the book. And while I have you here, thank you for putting my little quote in there about seeing Brian in 2005. That blew my mind to see my little words in a book. It's humongous to me.
Well,
Um,
you're welcome. It's I there were some people I had to really push. Some of the UK fans, when I posted the announcement, I'm doing this book. Here's what I need from you. Some people sent stuff in right away, and
yeah,
some of the oldest and dearest fan friends, nothing, cricket, so to speak. And it was like, come on, John, come on, Mike. You gotta be in the book.
right.
And
Absolutely.
because they deserve to be part of it, because they had been on the journey longer, probably longer than I. Nobody had been on the journey other outside of Brian's immediate circle longer than Ray.
Yeah,
Ray Lawler, who
yeah.
I met because of Smile,
Right,
not
right.
because Smile existed, but because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Um, and that's that we bonded over that, and you both New Yorkers and Yankee fans and pizza fans, and
Yep.
we had the same political bent, and we had a lot to talk about all the time,
Yeah.
not just is he ever going to finish Smile.
Right.
The perhaps the most rewarding thing of all of it, because you asked me about earlier about how did I feel about being involved and being there. Well, a couple of things. One, when I asked Brian the question, what made you decide to now was the time? And he goes, well, you and Melinda. And it was like, what? Me
And
and Melinda? It was like
that was really special reading that part of the book. Yeah.
that was wild.
Yeah. That's
But
huge.
but we had always talked in our little circle of Smile fanatics that if he ever was able to finish it in whatever form he finished it, that there would be great new music.
Yeah.
And so perhaps it wasn't as exciting as going to London to see uh, uh, Brian Wilson present Smile, but going to see the world premiere of That Lucky Old Son
Mm.
was it was pretty damn exciting because I did not hear a note of it till I walked in there.
Oh, that's cool. It's like I love that album. That's one of my favorites.
It's pretty great,
Love that.
and uh, maybe on another time I'll tell you about how I was almost part of it.
Oh, we'll definitely chat about that. Yeah, that sounds coll
But I always, this is like my classroom. I do a thing with my students where they come on stage once a quarter and they interview me,
Ooh, that's awesome.
and they always ask me questions that I never would have thought of. So
Completely.
so
Yeah.
and that's why I love talking to you because you always have something to ask that you know yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Is there anything left on your list of questions that you wanted to get to today?
Yeah, I think a good wrapping up question would be, you've written a lot about the Beach Boys over the years. You've done the liner notes that I grew up with. You've made a movie about Brian, you've been a part of his life, but now you've written a book dedicated to Smile exclusively, which is what got you into the Beach Boys hardcore to begin with. When you pick this thing up and look at it and hold it and flip through it and know that you did this, what does it mean to you in terms of the work you've done through, you've done so many cool projects throughout your life. What does this one mean to you as it's now coming out in a month or a few weeks?
April 3rd in England, April 15th here in the States. Yeah, so
15.
it's pretty close. Um, what does it mean to me? It's really special. It's special beyond. Let me see if I can come put it into words somehow. I'm a writer. I should be able to do that.
It's a lot,
Um,
it's a lot to throw into a soundbite. I mean, it's
um, it it's unbelievable that I did it. I'm really proud of it. But probably more than anything, what's going to matter to me is the response of you and everybody else who buys it and reads it and what they say. So that's the circle.
yeah,
It's I could have done this and self-published it and sold a few copies, and would it have made any, it's like throwing a pebble in a pond. What ripples does this cause? Does this get people who were never into Smile? Does it get them into it?
right.
Does this get people who, but it sounds was the be all and end all to go, hmm, I gotta reconsider Smile. Does this get anybody who never cared about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys' greatest hits,
Yeah,
came to the story much later through Dominic Fiori's book and my film. This is this kind of a period on the sentence that lets them their life and Smile full circle. And that's why I wanted the chapters from the fans. That's why I wanted the anthology, because I wanted to see what it meant to others like me.
yeah,
And it's I'm kind of at a loss for words as to what it feels like to hold it. It's it's um it's it's kind of unbelievable, to tell you the truth.
yeah,
Um, and I'm so disappointed that it didn't make it out last year during the 20th anniversary of Ryan Wilson Presents Smile. It's
yeah,
close to Royal Festival Hall. So I've assuaged that notion by the idea that he was still on tour doing Smile 20 years ago. So
he was.
it,
That's
it's
true.
it's it's coming out, and he got his first Grammy for Smile in 2020 in 2005. So it's the 20th
Right.
anniversary of that.
Yeah,
So there's no regrets at all. Um, I've got my health is and my fingers hold out. I've got plenty more to write and say. Um, but I don't think anything's gonna. I don't think anything I could write about Brian Wilson would be more meaningful in this century than this. Um, the fact that the Beach Boys and the California Myth led to people like Darian coming Brian Wilson and Smile fans is, I was thinking about that row of dominoes being set up.
yep,
So if he doesn't, here I get around on the radio from Endless Summer and buy Endless Summer and get into the Beach Boys and hear Wouldn't It Be Nice and Shampoo and say, oh, there's another level to the Beach Boys, and then take my book out of his library and read it.
yeah,
All of those things are dominoes, on top of which he's incredibly musical and has incredibly long fingers. So he
yeah,
has the ability to make the chords that needed to be made to
yeah,
play the music.
right. So
And
perfectly.
so there are so many things that had to happen for this to exist.
Yeah.
Ryan Wilson presents Smile to exist, for Smile to exist. That I'm just proud and fortunate to be part of the story.
I mean, and we're all better for it. I mean, like I've told you a million times, I've grown up reading your words, watching your movies, and then at one point, I didn't know some of the movies I loved were by you. There's a Marx Brothers one. I was like, what the? Like, there's a lot of things in my life that were like that too, where I was like, who is this David Leaf guy? Why do I love all the things he's done? Um,
It's funny because my students go to IMDb is a place on the web where they list all your credits as writer, producer, director.
yeah,
And there are some shows on there that under my name that I have no idea what they are. Serious, I'm serious. I'm not. It's like no, that's there by mistake. Or there are shows that are there that oh yeah, I did that. They they were just jobs.
right, right,
Um, there are certain ones that matter a lot. My students will say to me, because I try to teach about how to be successful in my classes.
yeah,
I'm not going to teach anybody how to be Elton John or Brian Wilson or Paul McCartney. No one can teach that.
yeah,
What does it take to be successful? And I talk about the 4 Ds: discipline, dedication, devotion, and determination. Just made
yeah,
that up.
that's it.
When Randy Newman was a guest in my songwriting class and heard that, he goes, "You forgot the 5th D." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Depression." But when I talk to them, they say to me, "Professor, how did you do all of those things?" And I said, "It was the willingness to take no." And uh, I can't tell you how long it took for me to sell the All Star tribute or the U.S. versus John Lennon.
Yeah.
We're talking a decade for each of those,
Oh my God.
conception to reality.
Whoa.
It's just financing is the hard part of businesses I've been in,
Right.
and so I'm going to stay with books because they're a lot less expensive to
Less
do.
headaches.
Well, I can write them and just make an ebook out of them and send them out. So
Good, yeah.
so
Um,
so they'll be there.
well, David, thank you so much for being on the show. I adore this book. For me, the biggest takeaway was the respect and the love and the care, which has always been in your work and your films and the words you've written. There's an interest that piques curiosity with each project you've put out and inspires me to do more. And to go on to your domino effect, same thing with my little trajectory here. I've met and worked with so many random people I never thought I'd talk to because of sticking with the 4Ds and doing the work that I do on here. It's completely true. Um, I'm stoked for people to read this book. I'm stoked to help promote it and chat about it because it's essential, especially for new fans who are always going to discover Smile. So now we have a brand new book for those kids who are going to discover Smile for the first time next year, or 6 months from now, or tomorrow. It's really special that this is on the shelf soon, and I just
Thank
can't
you.
thank you enough for writing it, man. Loved it, loved it.
Thank, thank you so much. You know, one thought that just popped into my head. We talk about, I've talked about in my music classes, um, 3 great albums in a row. So there was Purple Soul, Revolver, Sergeant Pepper.
Yeah.
About Stevie Wonder having a string of albums ending with songs in the key of life. We talk about the Beach Boys, Today, Summer Days, It Sounds.
Hmm.
I think we can now add Smile and make it a threesome.
Oh, I like that.
And 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 the what ifs, well, we can consign them to it doesn't matter. What matters is the music we can hear. And if you open your heart to Brian Wilson, you will find that he fills it up with music and harmony. And clearly, that's what I needed in my life. And I think all of us Smile fanatics, Beach Boys fans, the hardcore Pionistas, as I think Bob Haynes nicknamed us. I think music means so much, and I'm kind of aching for them to discover Brian Wilson and Smile.
It's something to look forward to, and I love when I talk to people who've heard some of the Beach Boys stuff for the first time. It's like, good, you're getting it. You know, enjoy the journey. Um, David, thank you so much. This was so much fun to chat about this book, and
My pleasure, and keep doing what you're doing. I love what you do.
that hits me right here, man. That's huge.
Well, it's true. It's true. That's why I'm here.
It means the world. Thanks everyone for watching. If you want to follow David online, his website will be linked below. Also, he uses Facebook. And I'll put links below for the book as well, so you can check it out and pre-order it there too. But thank you guys for watching. Leave your comments below, questions for David, of course, and we'll see you guys next time we hang out.
I just have to add, there's a Facebook page that was created for the book.
That's
So
right.
the title Smile, um, Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson. So you can go to that Facebook page where the latest news will be posted. And starting on the 15th of March, we're going to do the 30 days of Brian Wilson leading up to the release. And if you ask me what's going to be on those days, I can't tell you because I don't know yet. But what I do is whatever that page posts, I then share it onto my page, and very often Michael DeMartin, who runs Brian's page, he'll put it up on the Brian Wilson official page too. So I appreciate everybody who looks at my work, the films, and reads it. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.